Today, I'm going to show you my V-neckband tutorial, both construction and application, and I will be using Wash Away Wonder Tape in this tutorial. This method works best on neckbands that are 2 inches in width or greater. If your neckband is less than 2 inches in width, I will show you now how you can modify it to best use this method. In this video, we will be basting our neckband and then removing that basting stitch when we attach our neckband to our neckline. I prefer to use this method on neckbands that are 2 inches in width or greater. Here, I have a neckband that is 1.5 inches in width. I simply added here an additional 1/2 inch of width to modify the neckband to make it work best for this method. So if you have a neckband that is thinner in width, you can simply increase the width to be 2 inches to 2.5 inches, and it will work well for this method. We will begin by cutting out our neckband pattern piece. You always want to cut your fabric out with the stretch running along the length of the neckband and cut it on the fold. I have my fold here at the top and the notches here at the bottom. We will not, however, be cutting out the notch now. We will be cutting the neckband out as a rectangle, and I will show you that next. Cut out both long edges of the neckband, and rather than cutting out the notch, I simply take my clear ruler or any measuring device, lay it across the opening of the notch, and cut straight across to form a rectangle neckband the same length and size as your V-neckband. Once you have your neckband cut out, we are going to use a fabric marker to transfer the triangle V from your pattern piece onto your fabric piece. Ensure that the 2 short ends line up perfectly and that your fabric is on the fold with right sides together. You will be marking on the wrong side of the fabric. Lay your pattern piece atop and weight it down if you wish, and then use your preferred marking device. I like to use these friction pins. They're standard pins that you can purchase at any office supply store, Frixon, but they erase when you add heat. So when you iron them or press them, they disappear. So I am going to use a clear ruler just to help me keep my line straight and hold the fabric in place as I transfer my mark. So along each side of the triangle V, you will simply transfer that shape onto your fabric piece. And I will show you what that looks like. My transferred mark onto my fabric piece. And we will be sewing this with a straight stitch on our sewing machine. I will be using a straight stitch set to a length of 3. My needle is a stretch needle. You can also use ballpoint or jersey. And I have polyester thread both atop and in my bobbin. I'm going to raise my needle and my presser foot, slide my project beneath, and then carefully lower the needle into the very top point of the triangle. I'm going to angle the project so that I can sew directly down one side of the triangle, being sure to backstitch. I sew with my straight stitch down both sides of the triangle, backstitching to lock my stitches. And then you can see here that I've stitched along the marks that I've made. Now I'm going to move back over to my table along those lines. I'm going to trim with an approximate 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to leave a 1/4 inch of fabric below the drawn lines in the stitching, trimming away a triangle notch. Now I'm going to cut upward from the point to my line of stitching, but be careful not to cut through your line of stitching. Stop just below. At this point, I like to stop and press. I move my project so that the V notch is facing up, and I separate the seam allowance on each side of the triangle that I've sewn, pressing the seam allowance open. I do this for both sides of the V notch, separating the seam allowance and pressing it down. This helps to give you a nice sharp point on your V. Then fold both edges together, pressing your 2 seam allowances together, forming your V neckband, and press in place. At this point, I like to press all the way around the band. This is a memory press, and it's really just personal preference. You don't have to do this, but I think it helps to achieve professional results, to press frequently and to press well. So I do press all the way around my band. We're going to move over to the machine and we are going to serge with a basting stitch. So I am going to keep the free edge of the fabric just to the left of the serger knife. I will not be removing any portion of the neckband. I will just allow the stitches to wrap around the two free edges of the fabric, adhering the two together. So serge with a 0 seam allowance all the way around your project, beginning at the point, all the way around, and ending back at the point. Now the reason that I basted the neckband is because the edges of the knit fabric curl. And so when you're trying to stretch your neckband to attach to the neckline, the edges by their nature are going to curl. And if you don't baste, you're trying to deal with the two free edges of the neckband and the neckline itself. So that's 3 free edges of fabric, ensuring that they all line up. So adding this basting stitch simply gives you greater freedom and confidence when you are attaching your neckband. You can see here that I can stretch it and maneuver it, and it stays in place and holds its shape. And you can see here, without the basting stitch, the edges curl in on themselves, and it is a lot more difficult when you try to unravel the curled edges and line them up. It can be a lot more fiddly. So this is an optional step, basting with your serger. If you don't have a serger and you only have a standard sewing machine, you can baste with your sewing machine as well. Simply use a zigzag stitch. I narrow the width of the zigzag stitch and then elongate the length as long as it will go. That's usually a 5. And simply zigzag along the edge, holding the two together. I am now going to use my sewing machine and a straight stitch to stay stitch the very edge of the neckline along the point, approximately 2 inches up on each side of the neckline from the point. I am going to be drawing this on with my fabric marker just for clarification today so that you can see where I will be sewing. I take it over to my machine and you can see I will be sewing 2 inches on one side of the point and then approximately 2 inches on the other side along the neckline. I elongate my stitch. You do not need to backstitch, simply lower your needle and your presser foot with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, sew along the neckline down toward the point of the V. When you reach the point of the V, lower your needle, raise your presser foot, and pivot your project so you can begin sewing up the other side of the V. So approximately 2 to 3 inches up the other side of the V, and you have completed your stay stitch. I simply do this to help stabilize the knit fabric as you're attaching your neckband to keep it from stretching and losing its shape. I am quickly going to press my basted neckband. You know I always take every opportunity to press, and then we will begin pinning our neckband to our neckline. So grab your bodice, lay it down so that you can see the front of the bodice. You can see the stay stitching here. Now we are going to cut downward and make a notch. You will make a small snip, cutting downward towards your stay stitching, but not through your stay stitching, right at the point of your V. I am now going to use my wash away wonder tape to hold the neckband in place so that I can reposition it before I baste it on. I'm going to take a 2 to 3 inch piece of wash away wonder tape and place it along the free edge of the neckline on either side of the little notch that I just made at the point. Remove the paper backing. Now you would take your neckband and place the point of the V down directly pointing at the notch that you made along your neckline. So line them up, place your finger along the point of the neckband, and adhere one side of the basted neckband to the wash away wonder tape. Grasp the point of the V and pivot and adhere the other side of the neckband to the other side of the wash away wonder tape. Now flip your neckband up and make a visual confirmation that you like the look and that there are no puckers. Generally, it will need to be readjusted. You can gingerly lift the Wash Away Wonder Tape, smooth out any puckers, and just re-adhere. Do this to both sides, or as much as necessary, until you are satisfied with the clean look at the point of your neckband and your bodice. I will show you mine once I'm satisfied with the clean look. And now I'm going to take this over to my sewing machine and sew the point on with a straight stitch. Now this is more of an actual construction stitch and not a basting, so I do not elongate my straight stitch. I will be sewing right here at the same place that we basted, but now I will be using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I like to turn my project so the neckband is on the bottom and I can see the basting stitch. I lower my project under my presser foot, begin exactly where I started my basting stitch, but now with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now it's important to keep your project, the bodice of your shirt, smooth. If you have any excess fabric facing back, you need to pull it forward and smooth everything out. Pull any excess fabric forward toward you and smooth it off to the left. Sew forward with a straight stitch set at a length of 3 with a 1/2 inch seam allowance along the edge of the neckband until you reach the point of the neckband. Lower your needle, pivot, and begin sewing approximately 2 to 3 inches up the other side. When you pivot, you will need to rearrange the excess fabric on your bodice. Once you pivot, pull the excess fabric back and away from you so that your project is smooth under the presser foot. Sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Grasping your serger tail at the point of your V can help ensure that you keep your project straight. Sew approximately 2 to 3 inches up the other side, backstitch, and visually confirm that you are satisfied with the point on your V-neck. We are now going to pin the V-neck to the neckline. We will begin by identifying center back. Simply find the center portion along the back bodice and place a clip or a pin to identify that mark. We are now going to find the center back of our neckband. Grasp the point between your fingers and find the direct opposite point on the back of the neckband and place a pin or a clip there. Now you can see that the basted edge of my neckband is facing down and the folded edge is facing up. You want to twist it toward you so that the basted edge is facing up. Ensure that the neckband is not twisted, hold it out in front of you, and flip it up once so that the basted edge is facing up. Slide it behind the center back of your project and transfer the clip. You may need to watch this one part again. Simply rewind and ensure that you're sliding the neckband behind center back and that the basted edge of your neckband is lined up with the neckline. We are now going to find our quarter points by holding center back and center front in your hands, lining up the free edge of the fabric with the basted edge of the neckband, and stretching just slightly, walking your fingers in until you find the midpoint, pin or clip. And we will do that to the other side. Hold center back in one hand and the V point in the other. Stretch just slightly so that the neckband is the same length as the neckline. Walk your fingers toward the center, pin or clip to hold in place. If you wish, you can also place pins or clips between these. They are called 1/8 points. Simply grab each clip in your hand, stretch just slightly, and place a clip in the center. You can place as many pins or clips as you want to feel confident about the placement of your neckband. When adhering the neckband, we will be stretching the neckband just slightly to be the same length as the neckline, but not stretching the neckline at all. You now have your neckband pinned or clipped to your neckline, and we are going to move over to our serger and begin serging the neckband on. We are now going to serge to attach our neckband to our neckline. We will be doing so with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. You will be removing the basting stitch from your neckband with your serger as you sew. You can keep the serger knife lined up with the inside edge of your neckband basting stitch, and this will help keep your neckband an even width all the way around. I like to serge with the neckband atop so that I can see the basting stitch and keep my sight line. Ensure that the bodice of your project is smooth and off to the left and not puckered. Line up the free edge of your neckband and your neckline and begin serging with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Continue to serge all around the neckline with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, removing the basting stitch with your serger knife as you go. Continue to smooth your project and line up the free edge of the neckband with the free edge of the neckline. You will be stretching the neckband just slightly between each clip or pin to be the same length as the neckline. When you've reached the other end of the V, it can help to hold your serger tail and work very slowly, smoothing any ease under the V forward and to the side. Staying with your 1/2 inch seam allowance, serge right off the end of the point of the V. Chain off 4 inches and cut in the center. Visually confirm that you are satisfied with the point on your V-neck. And we are going to press our project, and we are almost done. We are now going to block press. Lay your project flat on your ironing board and press with a hot steam iron. If you are using double brush poly or a high polyester content fabric, you may need to pull your iron down to a medium setting, and you can always test on scraps first. Ensure that the seam allowance is facing down all the way around the neckline and press. Let your project completely cool before moving it, and you have just completed a professional looking V neckline. Congratulations!